August 23, 1939. Moscow Airport. Evening settles over the Soviet capital like a curtain. The air is heavy, still, and tense. A German aircraft comes down out of the darkening sky, its engines whining as it descends toward the runway. Ground crews wait in silence. Soviet officials stand beneath the lights, their faces unreadable. And among them is Vladimir Potemkin, Soviet Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is not waiting for an ally. He is not waiting for a friend. He is waiting for Nazi Germany. The aircraft lands. Its wheels strike the runway. The engines slow. And from the plane steps Joachim von Ribbentrop, Foreign Minister of the Third Reich, polished, ambitious, and carrying in his briefcase the outline of a deal that will stun the world. Only days earlier, Europe had been watching Berlin and Moscow as enemies. Ideological opposites. Nazism and Bolshevism. Two systems that claimed to hate each other completely. But tonight, they are about to sit at the same table. Potemkin greets Ribbentrop warmly. Too warmly. The gesture itself is a signal. Not to the cameras. Not to the crowd. There is no crowd. This is diplomacy in the shadows. A car waits. Ribbentrop is ushered inside. The doors close. The convoy pulls away from the airport and moves through Moscow toward the Kremlin. You can almost feel the weight inside that car. The muffled engine. The passing lights. The silence between men who know they are carrying history toward a locked room. Outside, the city continues as if nothing has happened. But inside the Kremlin, everything is already prepared. Waiting there is Joseph Stalin. Not absent. Not distant. Present. Watching. Calculating. Beside him stands Vyacheslav Molotov, hard, disciplined, granite face. These are not men meeting to prevent war. They are meeting to divide its first victims. For months, Europe has been moving toward catastrophe. Adolf Hitler has already taken Austria. He has shattered Czechoslovakia. He has demanded concessions from Poland. His generals have been told to prepare for war by September 1. Britain and France have promised to defend Poland if Germany attacks. Neville Chamberlain has given Warsaw a guarantee. Paris is bound by its own commitments. And yet, there is one power whose position could still change everything. The Soviet Union. If Moscow sides with Britain and France, Hitler risks a two-front war before he is ready. If Moscow stays neutral or worse, cooperates, Poland is exposed. That is why Ribbentrop is here. Not merely to sign a paper, but to remove the last great obstacle from Hitler's path. Inside the Kremlin, the meeting begins. No battlefield. No marching columns. No bombs falling. Just papers, maps, interpreters, cigarettes, and the cold ritual of men discussing the fate of nations without them present. The official agreement is simple enough to announce. A non-aggression pact. Germany and the Soviet Union will not attack each other. They will settle disputes peacefully. They will avoid joining alliances aimed against one another. It sounds almost reasonable. Almost stabilizing. Almost like peace. But that is the mask. Behind the public treaty is the real weapon. A secret protocol. A hidden map of Eastern Europe. And on that map, Poland is already being cut apart. The German sphere will take the west. The Soviet sphere will take the east. Latvia, Estonia, and Finland are marked for Soviet influence. Lithuania's place will be adjusted in later bargaining. Bessarabia, on Romania's eastern edge, is also placed within Soviet interests. Lines are drawn with ink, but they will soon be redrawn in blood. The men in the room understand this. They know exactly what the language means. Spheres of influence is a polite phrase. It means armies. It means ultimatums. It means occupation. It means vanished borders. Poland is not being consulted. The Baltic states are not being consulted. Romania is not being consulted. Millions of people are being moved from one empire's appetite to another's with the stroke of a pen. And still, the meeting continues calmly. Ribbentrop has reason to be confident. Hitler wants freedom of action in Poland. Stalin wants time. Time to rebuild his armed forces after purges. Time to push the Soviet frontier westward. Time to let the capitalist powers bleed each other before Moscow chooses its next move. Each dictator believes he is using the other. Each thinks the agreement is temporary. Each thinks he can break it later. And both are right. But before betrayal comes cooperation. By the early hours of August 24th, the documents are ready. The room is lit harshly. Faces shine under the lamps. The photographers are allowed in. History needs its image. Ribbentrop sits. Molotov sits. Stalin stands nearby, calm and satisfied. Pens move across paper. At around 2 in the morning, the pact is signed. Warfare History Network's account notes that the agreement was concluded in Moscow after Ribbentrop's arrival on August 23, with the signing taking place at 2 a.m. on August 24. It also describes the secret division of Poland and Soviet influence over the Baltic states and Bessarabia. Then comes the most chilling part. Not the signatures. Not the protocol. The toasts. Champagne is opened. Glasses are raised. Stalin drinks to Hitler's health. A Soviet dictator, whose state has spent years denouncing fascism, now lifts a glass to the leader of Nazi Germany. For a moment, the room almost looks cordial. Men smile. Cameras flash. The world has not yet seen the secret protocol. It only sees the public shot. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union have made a deal. In London and Paris, the news lands like a physical blow. Diplomats stare at reports in disbelief. Military planners understand instantly what it means. The fragile hope of containing Hitler through a united front has collapsed overnight. In Warsaw, the meaning is even clearer. Poland is alone. Not officially. Not yet. Britain and France still stand behind their guarantee. But geography is cruel. Germany sits to the west. East Prussia to the north. Slovakia to the south. And now, the Soviet Union waits to the east. A vise has been built around Poland, and the hands tightening it belong to two dictators who pretend, for one night, to be partners. The cameras capture the smiles. The newspapers print the headlines. The diplomats search for explanations. But the truth is simpler and darker than any public statement. This was not peace. This was permission. Permission for Hitler to strike. Permission for Stalin to collect his share. Permission for Europe's borders to be torn open again. And in just over a week, the first tanks will cross into Poland. The first bombs will fall. The first cities will burn. The pact has been signed. The trap has been set. And Poland has 9 days left. The ink is barely dry when the lie begins. The public treaty says peace. It says restraint. It says Germany and the Soviet Union will not attack each other. To the world, that is shocking enough. But it is not the real story. The real story is folded away, hidden, classified, denied. A secret protocol attached to the pact like a dagger beneath a cloak. And on that secret paper, Eastern Europe is being carved apart. Not by generals in the field. Not by people voting. Not by governments negotiating their own survival. By two dictators who do not intend to ask permission. The language is cold. Administrative. Almost bloodless. It speaks of spheres of influence as if whole countries are pieces on a desk. As if borders can be moved without screams. As if people can be assigned to one empire or another by geography alone. But everyone in that room understands what the phrase really means. Occupation. Deportation. Political murder. Wizens. New flags over old cities. Poland is the center of it. The country Hitler hates. The country Stalin distrusts. The country that stands between them. For Germany, Poland is an obstacle, a corridor, a target wrapped in ideology. Hitler has spoken for years about Lebensraum, living space in the East. To him, Poland is not a neighbor, it is ground to be broken open. For Stalin, Poland is also personal. Soviet armies had been defeated by Poland in 1920, halting the spread of revolution westward. In Moscow, that memory still burns. The eastern territories of Poland, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Poles, Jews, and others living equipped them, are seen by Stalin as land that can be reclaimed, absorbed, and controlled. So the deal is made. Germany will attack from the west. The Soviet Union will wait. Then, when Poland is already bleeding, the Red Army will move in from the east. Not as an ally. Not as a rescuer. As the second blade. Look at the map, and you can see the brutality of the plan. German forces will strike toward the Vistula, toward Warsaw, toward Brest-Litovsk. Soviet forces will later advance into eastern Poland, claiming they are protecting Ukrainians and Belarusians after the Polish state has supposedly collapsed. It is a pretext written in advance, a justification prepared before the crime. And Poland is not the only name on the secret list. The Baltic region is divided into shadows. Estonia, Latvia, Finland, Lithuania. Small countries that had survived the ruins of the First World War and built fragile independence in the space between empires. Now they are being marked again. To Stalin, the Baltic states are buffers, ports, forward positions, territory that pushes the Soviet frontier away from Leningrad and toward Europe. To the people living there, they are home. But in Moscow that night, home is irrelevant. Strategic depth matters more. Bessarabia, on Romania's eastern edge, is also placed within Soviet interests. A quiet phrase in a secret agreement. But later, that phrase will become an ultimatum. And the ultimatum will become occupation. This is the true violence of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It begins before the shooting. It begins with the assumption that smaller nations have no right to exist between great powers. The world learns only part of it. Newspapers report the non-aggression treaty. Editors try to explain how Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union's supposed ideological enemies could suddenly become partners. Some call it cynical. Some call it strategic. Some refuse to believe it will last. But almost no one outside the highest circles knows the full arrangement. That ignorance matters. Because if the secret protocol had been known immediately, the shock would have been even greater. The pact was not merely a promise not to fight. It was a blueprint for conquests. In Berlin, Hitler receives exactly what he needs. He has spent the summer preparing his generals for Poland. The invasion plan is ready. The troops are in position. German propaganda has already begun manufacturing incidents, portraying Poland as the aggressor. But without Soviet neutrality, the risk is immense. Germany remembers the First World War. A two-front war destroyed the Kaiser's empire. Hitler is determined not to repeat that mistake not yet. The pact removes the eastern danger. For the moment. Now Hitler can strike westward and eastward in stages, pretending to solve one problem at a time. In Moscow, Stalin also receives what he wants. Time, territory, and the chance to watch Germany fight Britain and France while the Soviet Union expands its borders. Stalin does not trust Hitler. Hitler does not trust Stalin. But trust is not required. Only advantage. That is what makes the pact so dangerous. It is not friendship. It is calculation. Two regimes that despise each other discover that, for the moment, their interests overlap. Hitler wants war without Soviet interference. Stalin wants expansion without German interference. So they shake hands over the countries between them. You can almost see the room after the signing. The chairs pushed back. The documents collected. The smiles still in place. The photographers gone. And somewhere among the papers, the secret map remains. There are no screams in the Kremlin that night. No shell bursts. No burning villages. No columns of refugees. Not yet. But the violence is already there. Compressed into clauses. Hidden in diplomatic language. Waiting for armies to translate it. 9 days later, the translation begins. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, German forces cross into Poland. Bombers appear overhead. Panzers roll through border defenses. The battleship Schleswig-Holstein fires on Westerplatte. The Second World War begins in Europe. And still, the Soviet Union waits. For 16 days, Poland fights Germany while watching the East. Polish commanders know the Soviets are a danger, but they do not know the full truth. They do not know their country has already been partitioned in secret. They do not know the second invasion has been agreed upon. They only know that the German assault is crushing, relentless, and fast. Then comes September 17th. The eastern horizon changes. Red Army columns cross the frontier. Soviet tanks move into Poland from the east. The trap closes. The Polish state is now attacked from both sides. The vise that was designed in Moscow begins to crush. For Polish soldiers, the situation becomes impossible. Fight Germany. Fight the Soviets. Withdraw. Protect civilians. Hold Warsaw. Escape to Romania or Hungary. There is no clean answer. Units that had been falling back eastward, hoping to regroup, suddenly find Soviet forces in front of them. The last strategic death disappears. The road to survival narrows into chaos. And for civilians, the nightmare spreads even faster. Bombed cities. Burning villages. Crowded roads. Families carrying whatever they can. People moving without knowing which army they are fleeing from anymore. The Pact's secret protocol becomes visible not as a document, but as human movement. Refugees on roads. Soldiers surrendering in fields. Border posts overrun. Flags change. Prisoners counted. Names written down. Lives redirected into systems of occupation. At Brest-Litovsk, German and Soviet forces meet. The symbolism is almost unbearable. The same city where Germany had forced revolutionary Russia into a harsh peace in 1918 now becomes a meeting point for Nazi and Soviet cooperation. Officers exchange formalities. Boundaries are adjusted. The victors divide the spoils. For Poland, there is no illusion left. The invasion is not a German campaign alone. It is a coordinated destruction. And yet the public lies continue. Germany claims it acted in self-defense. The Soviet Union claims it entered eastern Poland because the Polish state had collapsed and minorities needed protection. Both stories are mess. Both are designed to cover the same truth. Poland was not rescued. Poland was dismembered. The armies do what the diplomats prepared. They divide territory. They impose control. They begin the machinery of occupation. In the German zone, Nazi racial policy arrives with terrifying speed. In the Soviet zone, arrests, deportations, and political repression begin under a different flag. Two systems. Different symbols. Different languages. But for those trapped between them, the result is terror. This is the Pact's first consequence. Not world war in the abstract. Not diplomatic shock. But a country erased from the map by agreement before the first shot was fired. And the men who signed it knew. They knew exactly what they had done. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is often remembered as a diplomatic surprise. A shocking reversal. A cynical alliance. But that description is too clean. Too distant. It was a death sentence written in diplomatic form. And by the end of September 1939, the sentence has been carried out. Poland has been overrun. Germany and the Soviet Union stand face to face across a newly divided land. For now, they are partners. For now, the bargain holds. But beneath the handshake, another truth is already forming. This pact was never built to last. It was built to buy time. To steal land. To unleash war. And once those purposes were fulfilled, the devils would turn on each other. By the end of September 1939, Poland no longer exists as a functioning state. Not because its people stopped resisting. Not because its soldiers lacked courage. Not because its government simply vanished into weakness. Poland is destroyed because two powers agreed to destroy it. From the west, Nazi Germany imposes its rule with speed and cruelty. German troops move through cities and villages, seizing government buildings, rail stations, post offices, and police headquarters. New orders appear on walls, curfews, restrictions, warnings. A new occupation begins. From the east, the Soviet Union does the same in different language. Red Army columns roll into towns that had expected danger from Germany, not from Moscow. Soviet officers speak of liberation, protection, brotherhood. But behind the words, the arrests begin. Poland has not been conquered by one enemy. It has been divided between two systems of control. And both know exactly what they want. For Hitler, occupied Poland is not simply territory. It is the beginning of a racial empire. The Nazi vision for the East is brutal from the start: remove resistance, destroy leadership, exploit labor, reshape the land for German power. Poland's educated classes, political leaders, clergy, officers, and cultural figures become immediate targets. Because occupation is not enough. The nation itself must be broken. For Stalin, Eastern Poland is absorbed into the Soviet sphere. Elections are staged. Local institutions are dismantled. Polish authority is erased and replaced by Soviet control. The NKVD moves quietly at first, then openly. Names are gathered. Files created. Families marked. The Soviet occupation presents itself as liberation from Polish rule. But for many who live through it, the meaning becomes clear very quickly. Liberation can look like a knock on the door at night. And somewhere in the middle of this divided land, people begin to understand the true horror of the Pact. It did not merely decide borders. It delivered human beings into systems that saw them as obstacles. Polish soldiers captured by Germany are processed into prisoner systems. Those captured by the Soviets face a different fate. Thousands of Polish officers, policemen, officials, and intellectuals are taken eastward into Soviet custody. Many believe they will be held, interrogated, perhaps exchanged. They do not yet know what awaits them. Months later, in forests and prison sites, one of the darkest crimes linked to Soviet occupation will unfold: the massacre of Polish officers and elites, remembered most famously through Katyn. But in late 1939, that future is still hidden. The machinery is only beginning to move. Across the German zone, the terror is more visible, more immediate. Executions, roundups, forced labor, the beginning of ghettos, the targeting of Jews, the repression of Polish life. Different occupiers, different ideologies, but a shared resolve. Poland is being dismantled, and the world watches with limited power to stop it. Britain and France have declared war on Germany. But no Allied army arrives in Poland. No great counteroffensive crashes through the West. No immediate salvation appears. For Poland, the guarantees of spring and summer have become promises trapped behind distance, caution, and unreadiness. This is one of the cruelest dimensions of September 1939. Poland fights believing it's part of a wider coalition. And technically, it is. But practically, it stands alone. The German-Soviet agreement makes that isolation complete. Because any hope of retreating east, regrouping, and continuing resistance from Polish territory has been destroyed. The east is no refuge. It is another front. And so the Polish government escapes into exile. Soldiers cross into Romania, Hungary, Lithuania, and other neighboring states where they can. Some will eventually reach France, then Britain. Others will fight on in exile across Europe, North Africa, and beyond. Poland falls. But Polish resistance does not end. That is important. Because the Pact can divide land. It can erase borders. It can imprison leaders. But it cannot fully extinguish a nation. Still, in the autumn of 1939, the occupiers believe they can. Germany and the Soviet Union now stand over their spoils, adjusting boundaries and formalizing their arrangement. The secret protocol has done its work, but the details require refinement. Diplomats meet again. Maps are altered again. Territory is traded in political language that hides the violence underneath. The boundary between German and Soviet zones is finalized. Prisoners and populations are discussed. Economic arrangements continue. Raw materials will flow from the Soviet Union to Germany. Manufactured goods and military-related technology will move the other way. The partnership is not only territorial. It is practical. German industry needs resources. Grain, metals, rubber substitutes. The Soviet Union has access to raw materials Germany desperately needs if it is to wage a long war against the West. Stalin, meanwhile, wants machinery, equipment, and time to strengthen Soviet power. So the trains run. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths of the Pact. While Britain fights Germany, Soviet resources help keep the German war machine moving. Not forever, but long enough to matter. The public image remains awkward. Nazi newspapers that once denounced Bolshevism now soften their language. Soviet propaganda, once fiercely anti-fascist, shifts tone. Political hatred is temporarily edited for convenience. But underneath, no one has forgotten. Not Hitler. Not Stalin. Not the generals. Not the intelligence services. This is not trust. It is temporary alignment. Two predators feeding from the same kill. And once Poland is divided, both turn toward the next phase. For Hitler, the West awaits. Britain and France are at war with Germany, but the front has gone strangely quiet. The period later called the Phony War settles over Western Europe. There is war on paper, but little major action on land. For Stalin, the opportunities created by the Pact are immediate. The Baltic states are pressure. Finland is next. Bessarabia remains in view. The Soviet frontier is about to move westward again. The secret protocol was not a footnote. It was a schedule. And now Stalin begins collecting. In Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, Soviet demands arrive with force behind them, bases, troops, political pressure. The independence of the Baltic states begins to shrink under Moscow's shadow. In Finland, the Soviet Union demands territorial concessions for security around Leningrad. Finland refuses. And soon, another war begins. The Winter War. It shocks the world in a different way. The Soviet Union expects a quick victory. Instead, Finnish troops fight with extraordinary tenacity in snow, forests, and freezing darkness. Soviet losses mount. Stalin eventually gains territory, but not the easy triumph he expected. The lesson is sharp. The Red Army is powerful in size, but wounded in performance. The purges have damaged it. Its leadership has suffered. Its weaknesses are visible. Hitler is watching. And that mattered. Because while Stalin believes the Pact is buying time, Hitler is learning. He sees Soviet failures in Finland. He sees the Red Army stumble. He begins to convince himself that the Soviet Union is weaker than it appears. The seeds of future betrayal are growing already. But in 1939 and 1940, the Pact still holds. Germany conquers Denmark and Norway. Then comes May 1940. The German offensive in the West. The Netherlands. Belgium. France. The blitzkrieg that shocks Europe again. Within weeks, France collapses. Britain stands alone. And Hitler's power reaches its peak. All of it happens while the Soviet Union remains bound by the non-aggression agreement. Stalin watches, calculates, takes what he can. But he also sees something unsettling. Germany is winning too quickly. The balance that Stalin hoped to exploit is not developing as expected. He may have imagined a long war between Germany, Britain, and France, a war of exhaustion that would give the Soviet Union freedom to expand and prepare. Instead, France falls in 6 weeks. The map changes faster than Moscow anticipated. Now the Pact becomes more dangerous. Because Germany no longer looks tracked. Germany looks unstoppable. And when one predator grows too strong, the bargain becomes unstable. Still, cooperation continues. Diplomats meet. Trade flows. Borders remain formally calm. The photograph of Stalin, Molotov, Ribbentrop, and German officials remains one of the most disturbing images of the era, not because the men look monstrous in that moment, but because they look orderly. Civilized. Official. That is what makes it chilling. The catastrophe does not begin with chaos. It begins with paperwork. With signatures. With polite handshakes under lights. By 1940, the consequences are everywhere. Poland occupied. The Baltics pressured and then absorbed. Finland scarred. Bessarabia taken. Germany dominant in Europe. The Soviet Union larger, but increasingly exposed to the very power it helped unleash. And millions of people now live inside the shadow of a deal they never knew existed. For those under occupation, the Pact is not an abstract diplomatic event. It is the reason soldiers came. The reason flags changed. The reason neighbors disappeared. The reason borders stopped protecting anyone. The world had been shocked by the announcement of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. But the deeper truth is that shock was only the beginning. The Pact did not freeze Europe. It set it moving. Violently. And as 1941 approaches, the temporary peace between Hitler and Stalin grows thinner. More brittle. More suspicious. German planning begins to turn eastward. Soviet intelligence gathers warnings. Stalin receives reports, dismisses some, doubts others, calculates still. Hitler, intoxicated by victory, begins to imagine the greatest invasion in history. The pact that destroyed Poland is now approaching its own destruction. Because a deal made by devils can last only as long as both believe they are gaining more than they risk. And by 1941, Hitler believes the risk is worth it. The handshake in Moscow is about to become a knife in the back. June 22, 1941. Before dawn. The eastern horizon is still black. Across a frontier stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, millions of men wait in silence. German infantry crouch in assembly areas. Tank crews sit inside steel hulls, engines off, listening to the final minutes pass. Artillery crews stand beside their guns. Officers check watches under dim lamps. No one speaks more than necessary. Because everyone knows. Something enormous is about to begin. For nearly 2 years, Germany and the Soviet Union have lived under the shadow of their own agreement. The pact signed in Moscow. The handshake between enemies. The secret map. The partition of Poland. The trade shipments. The public lies. But now, that bargain is dead. At the front, German guns open fire. Thousands of artillery pieces roar at once, tearing the darkness apart. Shells scream eastward into Soviet positions. Barracks explode. Communications lines are cut. Airfields are struck before many aircraft can even lift off. The earth shakes across an entire continent. Operation Barbarossa has begun. Hitler has turned on Stalin. The man who once toasted the Nazi-Soviet agreement now receives the betrayal in fire. And the strange partnership that shocked the world in 1939 collapses in the most predictable way imaginable. Violently. This was always the hidden truth of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It was never peace. It was delay. Hitler had never abandoned his dream of conquest in the East. The pact had only cleared the road westward first. Poland could be destroyed without Soviet interference. France could be crushed. Britain could be isolated. Then, when Germany stood dominant in Europe, the East could be attacked. To Hitler, the Soviet Union was not a long-term partner. It was the ultimate target. To Stalin, Germany was not a trusted neighbor. It was a danger to be managed. Each dictator believed he could use time better than the other. Each believed the pact served him. Each believed betrayal could be controlled. But in war, timing belongs to the side that strikes first. And on June 22, 1941, Hitler strikes. Soviet border units are overwhelmed. German armored spearheads drive forward with terrifying speed. Luftwaffe aircraft hammer Soviet airfields. Entire formations are caught unprepared, cut apart, and circled. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. This is not a border raid. Not a limited campaign. It is an invasion meant to destroy a state. The German army advances in vast groups, north toward Leningrad, center toward Minsk and Smolensk, south toward Ukraine. The names on the map become objectives in one of the largest military operations in human history. And behind the soldiers comes something darker. The ideological war Hitler had always wanted. In Poland, the pact had already shown what happened when empires divided land without regard for the people living there. But in the Soviet Union, the violence expands beyond occupation into annihilation. Einsatzgruppen follow the army. Political commissars are targeted. Jewish communities are hunted. Prisoners of war are starved and abused on a massive scale. Villages burn. The war in the East becomes not only a military campaign, but a war of extermination. And the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact stands behind it like a warning no one could ignore. The agreement did not prevent this war. It helped prepare the conditions for it. For Stalin, the first hours are catastrophic. Warnings had to come. From spies. From diplomats. From deserters. From intercepted information. Again and again, reports suggested that Germany was preparing to attack. But Stalin doubted them. He feared provocation. He believed Hitler might still be pressured, delayed, negotiated with. He trusted not Hitler himself, but his own calculation. And now the calculation lies in ruins. Imagine the Kremlin in those first hours. Phones ringing. Reports arriving in fragments. Airfields destroyed. Cities bombed. Border forces collapsing. German troops across the frontier. The pact has not protected the Soviet Union. It has lulled it. For the people of eastern Poland, the Baltic states, Bessarabia, and other territories swallowed under the secret protocols, the betrayal brings another horror. They had already lived under one occupation. Now, the front returns. Armies move again. Flags change again. Prisons are emptied in panic. Executions occur during withdrawals. Refugees flood roads. The same lands traded in diplomatic secrecy become battlefields once more. The map drawn in Moscow is now being torn apart by tanks. In some places, German troops are initially greeted by people who hate Soviet rule. But hope collapses quickly. Because Nazi occupation does not bring liberation. It brings another system of terror. The populations trapped between Hitler and Stalin discover the cruelest truth of all. Being an enemy of one tyrant does not make the other a savior. The Pact had taught this lesson once. The invasion teaches it again. As German forces drive deeper into Soviet territory, Hitler believes victory will come quickly. The Red Army seems shattered. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners are taken. Cities fall. The advance appears unstoppable. To Berlin, it looks like another blitzkrieg triumph. But the Soviet Union does not collapse. It bends. It bleeds. It retreats. But it does not die. Factories are moved east. Reserves are mobilized. New armies form. The scale of Soviet manpower and territory begins to absorb the German blow. And slowly, the invasion begins to lose the one thing German strategy depends on most: momentum. By late 1941, German troops are at the gates of Moscow. They can see the prize. But they are exhausted. Their supply lines are overstretched. Winter arrives. Soviet counterattacks begin. The war that Hitler expected to finish in months becomes a struggle for survival. And the Pact's final irony becomes clear. The agreement that allowed Hitler to start the war on his terms also helped create the enemy coalition that would eventually destroy him. Before 1941, Britain stood largely alone in Europe. After Barbarossa, the Soviet Union is forced into the war against Germany. After December 1941, the United States will enter too. Hitler's choices build the alliance he cannot defeat. The handshake in Moscow leads, step by step, to the furnace of the Eastern Front. And for Stalin, betrayal does not erase his own role. The Soviet Union becomes a victim of Nazi aggression in 1941. But it had also been a partner in destroying Poland in 1939. It had taken territory under the secret protocol. It had traded with Germany while Europe burned. That is why the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact remains so morally charged. It does not fit cleanly into simple categories. It exposes the brutal logic of dictatorships when power matters more than principle. Two regimes that claimed to be mortal enemies found common ground in conquest. Then, when conquest was no longer enough, they turned on each other. The betrayal was not an accident. It was the Pact reaching its natural conclusion. Because there was never room in Europe for both Hitler's empire and Stalin's empire. Only a temporary line between them. And temporary lines, in the hands of men like these, are written to be crossed. By the end of 1941, the world has changed again. Poland remains occupied. The Baltic states are engulfed by war. The Soviet Union is fighting for survival. Germany is trapped in the east. Britain is no longer alone. And the conflict that began with a divided Poland is now truly global. The Pact is broken. But its consequences are everywhere. In the ruins of Warsaw. In the forests of Katyn. In the occupied Baltic capitals. In the burned villages of Ukraine and Belarus. In the snow outside Moscow. The signatures from August 1939 are no longer fresh ink. They are history written across bodies, borders, and cities. And yet, even after the betrayal, one final battle remains. Not on a battlefield. Not between armies. A battle over memory. Because after the war, both sides will try to shape what the Pact meant. Germany will be defeated. The Nazi regime will collapse. But the Soviet Union will survive. And for decades, the secret protocol, the true heart of the deal, will be denied, buried, and explained away. The documents were signed in a room. The consequences unfolded across a continent. But the truth itself would have to fight to survive. After the guns fall silent, the Pact does not disappear. Germany is defeated. Berlin lies in ruins. Hitler is dead. The Third Reich is gone. But the agreement made in Moscow on August 23, 1939, survives in a different form. Not as policy, not as diplomacy, as memory. And memory becomes another battlefield. In the ruins of post-war Europe, the Nazi-Soviet Pact is more than an uncomfortable document. It is evidence. Evidence that, before they became mortal enemies, Hitler and Stalin had cooperated. Evidence that Poland was not simply invaded by Germany, but partitioned by agreement. Evidence that the Baltic states, Bessarabia, and other regions were not accidents of wartime confusion, but part of a secret geopolitical bargain. For the countries trapped between Berlin and Moscow, the truth is obvious. They lived it. They saw the armies arrive. They saw flags change. They saw governments crushed. They saw prisons filled. They saw families deported. They saw neighbors vanish. But obvious truth is not always accepted truth. Because after 1945, the Soviet Union is no longer just one of the victors. It is a superpower. Its armies occupy Eastern Europe. Its influence stretches across Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany, and beyond. The Red Army that survived Barbarossa and took Berlin now stands at the center of the post-war order. And in that order, some truths become dangerous. The official Soviet story is simple. The pact was a defensive necessity, a way to buy time, a move forced by Western failure to build an anti-Hitler alliance, a tragic but practical decision made under pressure. But the secret protocol, that is another matter. For years, Soviet authorities deny it. They deny the hidden clauses. They deny the planned division of Eastern Europe. They deny the map beneath the handshake. The public treaty is acknowledged. The secret heart of it is buried. And for the people whose countries were swallowed under that secret protocol, the denial becomes a second injury. First, their sovereignty was erased. Then the record of that erasure was disputed. In Poland, memory is impossible to extinguish. Families remember September 17, 1939, when Soviet forces crossed the eastern frontier while Poland was already fighting for survival against Germany. They remember arrests, deportations, prison camps, officers who never came home. They remember that their country was crushed between two regimes. But under Soviet domination after the war, speaking too openly about that truth can be dangerous. History is allowed only within limits. The German invasion may be discussed. The Soviet invasion is treated differently. Words are controlled. Dates are softened. Responsibility is shifted. And yet, memory survives. It survives in families, in exile communities, in whispered conversations, in documents hidden away, in graves that cannot be publicly named. The same is true in the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. For them, the pact is not just the beginning of war. It is the beginning of lost independence. The arrival of Soviet demands, the presence of Red Army bases, the pressure, the staged political transformations, the annexations, the deportations. To Moscow, these are matters of security and socialist progress. To the people who lived them, they are occupation. That disagreement will last for generations. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact becomes more than a pre-war agreement. It becomes a test of historical honesty. Can a state admit that it expanded through secret deals? Can a victorious power acknowledge that it once cooperated with the regime it later helped destroy? Can the suffering of smaller nations be recognized when it complicates the story of victory? For decades, the answer is mostly no. The Cold War freezes memory into rival versions. In the West, the pact is used as proof of Stalin's cynicism and Soviet imperialism. In the Soviet bloc, the official narrative emphasizes the USSR's later sacrifice against Nazi Germany, an immense sacrifice that was real, enormous, and undeniable. But the existence of that sacrifice is used to push aside the earlier collaboration. And here lies the difficulty. History contains both truths. The Soviet Union suffered catastrophically under Nazi invasion. Millions died. Cities were destroyed. The Red Army played a decisive role in defeating Hitler. And the Soviet Union also signed a secret agreement with Hitler's Germany in 1939 that helped unleash the war and divide Eastern Europe. One truth does not erase the other, but political memory often tries to make it do exactly that. The documents remain contested. Copies surface in the West. Testimony accumulates. Historians investigate. Survivors speak. But official Soviet denial continues until the late 1980s. By then, the Soviet Union itself is under strain. Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms Glasnost and Perestroika open space for long-suppressed questions. Archives become less sealed. Public debate becomes harder to control. And across the Baltic states, memory becomes action. On August 23, 1989, 50 years after the Pact was signed, an extraordinary human chain forms across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It stretches for hundreds of kilometers. People stand hand in hand. Town to town. Road to road. Capital to capital. The Baltic Way. It is not an army. Not an uprising with weapons. But a living accusation. A human line drawn against the secret line once drawn on a map. The message is unmistakable. We remember. We were divided without our consent. We were occupied. And we want the truth acknowledged. That same year, the Soviet Union finally admits the existence of the secret protocol and condemns it. After decades of denial, the hidden core of the pact is publicly recognized. But acknowledgement cannot undo what happened. It can only restore the record. And even that matters. Because truth, once buried by power, is not automatically recovered. It has to be forced back into the open. By documents. By witnesses. By historians. By people willing to stand in the road and say, "This happened." The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact remains one of the most infamous diplomatic agreements of the 20th century, not simply because enemies signed it. Enemies make temporary deals all the time. It is infamous because of what it enabled. It cleared Hitler's path into Poland. It gave Stalin territory and time. It divided sovereign countries without their knowledge. It helped begin a war that would consume the globe. And it showed how easily ideology can bend when empire is on the table. In the end, the pact did not save Hitler. It did not save Stalin from invasion. It did not create lasting peace. It created a countdown. First to Poland's destruction. Then to the occupation of Eastern Europe. Then to Barbarossa. Then to the greatest land war in history. Then to decades of argument over what had truly happened in that room in Moscow. And that is why the photograph still chills. Ribbentrop seated. Molotov signing. Stalin standing nearby. Faces composed. Documents arranged. A moment of calm before the world tears open. The camera captures men behaving as if they are making order. But what they are really doing is authorizing chaos. A war does not always begin with a gunshot. Sometimes it begins with a handshake. Sometimes with a map. Sometimes with a clause no one is allowed to see. And on that August night in 1939, in the Kremlin, two dictatorships made a bargain with each other. A bargain built on lies, on ambition, on the belief that nations could be erased if powerful men agreed to erase them. They called it non-aggression. But history knows what it was. A deal of the devils.